Hello and welcome to Price of Football, the podcast that follows the money behind the beautiful game. I'm Kevin Day and he is back. Lecturer in football finance at Liverpool University, Kieran Maguire sitting propped up serenely on his daybed and happily able to fit me in between an interview on TalkSport Belgium and a just-in-case phone call to a certain lady in Russia. How are you feeling, mate? You all right?
I'm okay. Yeah, sort of 6 out of 10 at present, but we'll be back. We'll be back irritating clubs left, right, and centre as soon as I get a chance.
Yeah, that's better than you were on Sunday. You were very much a 2 out of 10. Well, when I eventually joined in the WhatsApp conversation, of course, because you sent a message to Guy, our producer, at 3 in the morning, which was quite incoherent. And then Guy responded at 7, and I caught up at 10:30 when I got up. And sorry, that was the cat. Just came to make sure you're okay. The cat's. You can't see this at home, viewers, obviously, unless you're psychic of some sort. But the cat just popped up to say hello to Kieran, and also she's had a massive argument with 2 starlings this morning, which she lost. So she's pretending to be big and brave while making sure Daddy's around. She's like a toddler. Anyway, that's an unnecessary insight to both our lives there, Kieran, really, isn't it? So, we promised everybody a bumper podcast while you were out of action. And you'll be pleased to note, I'm sure, all the lovely tweets you got of concern.
Yes, very kind, actually.
Yes, 7 I counted. Is the Baroness looking after you, by the way, I heard?
She is, yeah. She does look after me in amazing ways. She actually came up with a pair of rubber gloves, which got me very excited initially, but then I realised they were for medical purposes.
Well, that's way too much insight now, isn't it? See, the little cat story was a charming little bit of insight into my life, and now you've ruined it with that. As I say, we promised you a bumper podcast. Thank you for your patience on Monday. I'm sorry we couldn't bring you a pod, but you know the reasons. So we'll get through a couple of Thursday stories, Kieran, and then we'll go back to the questions we were planning to do last weekend, because they're very good questions. Now, first of all, news that Premier League clubs, even if the season resumes behind closed doors, may still have to repay £340 million to TV broadcasters.
Well, I think that's worst case scenario if football does resume.
Right.
The broadcasters have a contract which is for the Premier League to supply given games on given dates. And they've not supplied anything for half of March, for the whole of April, and clearly for the whole of May as well. So on the basis of that, potentially, the likes of Sky and BT, they've not been able to sell advertising. They've not been able to collect money from subscribers. So I think everybody's looking at the small print of the deal. The Premier League season is supposed to have ended this weekend. It would have been the traditional Sunday final end of season. And in theory, that's when the contract, to a large extent, expires in terms of the delivery of matches. What Sky have bought, they've bought matches during those individual months. They've also bought the atmosphere at grounds, because right. I think one of the things we will find out is watching matches behind closed doors bears no resemblance to having a full crowd, giving it large. Because it does add to the enjoyment of both viewers and anybody. Even you talk to players, they will say the crowds do make a difference. So potentially, I think the domestic broadcasters will come to some form of arrangement with the Premier League clubs, but the overseas broadcasters are far more likely to say breach of contract and we're not going to play ball. Some have already, I think, withdrawn the final payments, and we have to see where we go from here.
Would there not be something in the contract, though, that covered potential? I mean, it's unlikely, but you could have a very bad weather month, for example, where the grounds are fit to play football, but fans simply can't get to them. So is that not covered in some kind of break of contract? I mean, obviously this sort of thing isn't going to be predicted, but there must surely be leeway somewhere for the broadcasters to understand that sometimes matches can't go ahead.
I think the domestic broadcasters, in the form of the Premier League's partners in Sky and BT, probably will take a view along those lines. But remember, these days, only around about half of the total broadcasting value comes from selling domestic rights. That the Premier League is so successful, if you are a broadcaster in Thailand or Nigeria or South America, you might be speaking to your lawyers where the Premier League is part of your overall package. And the thing is, you're not able to sell, you're not able to get subscription money in because 98 sports out of 100 aren't taking place. Premier League matches aren't the be-all and the end-all, in the same extent that French football isn't that important to us. So I think those overseas broadcasters will be trying to find a way out of not paying, and you can understand it from their perspective, because then if you're not getting money in, how can you pay money out?
Now, Andy Holt is the chairman of Accrington Stanley, and as far as his pod is concerned, officially one of the good guys. He tweeted this week, and I quote in full, "Football clubs below the Premier League have never been at higher risk, and for this reason I am taking steps to separate the club from its stadium. I'm in detailed talks with lawyers and accountants in order to achieve this." Now, we know because he's a good guy that there's no sinister connotation in this, as there might have been if Steve Dale had tweeted it this time last year. But why? What steps would he be taking? Why is he taking them? And is it right that he's publicised that fact?
As we've seen in the case of Stadia, you look at Coventry, you look at what's happened at Bury, and so on. They are valuable assets. And if they fall into the wrong hands, it could mean bad news for clubs. I think what Andy was effectively saying is that by separating the club from the stadium, and I suspect what Andy is going to be doing is to put the stadium into the ownership of a fan's trust or something of that nature, then that the long-term sustainability of the club, the long-term future of the club can be guaranteed to a greater extent. So if Accrington Stanley Football Club fall by the wayside because there's no football taking place for another 12 months, then if the club goes into administration, which we hope doesn't happen, but none of us want anything of this nature, the person buying it will be buying the football club, but will not be acquiring the rights to the stadium, which they could then potentially use for other purposes. So this does appear to be a protective issue. We have seen separation of stadia and clubs before, where the ownership of the stadium could then be transferred to yet another party, or we find that the stadium could be used for other purposes. I think Andy's intentions are different to that.
Yes, of course. And Accrington, we know, are arguably one of the smallest, if not the smallest club in the Football League. But their fans, possibly as a corollary of that, are very invested in the club. We know that there's lots of very good community and fan groups. So if the stadium goes to one of them, I think that's something we would all applaud, wouldn't it? If it guarantees the safety of the club going ahead. Now, you fell ill on Saturday night. And Saturday morning, you were doing what you do best, and so you may not remember this because of how you were, but you, in your own words, started a bit of a shitstorm. They were the words you used. I apologise for the language at home, listeners, but you've already had rubber gloves, so that's a minor thing in this pod. So Sunderland. Now, I think I understand why you caused problems with this. The Sunderland draft accounts were revealed or leaked. And there was a £20 million write-off to a company called Madrox. Now, why people cross, and in particular, why are they cross at you, Kieran? Because they were rather cross at you, to the extent that I did wonder whether your illness was a tactical withdrawal from the world of social media.
Well, at 6:15 on Saturday morning, I was contacted by TalkSport to say that there's a story breaking in relation to Sunderland. Any chance you could pop on? So I sort of read up on it. I've got to confess, I was sent a copy of Sunderland's draft accounts on March the 4th, and I've been sitting on it because I think it was out of respect of the person who sent it to me, but also what you do tend to find is sometimes when data is leaked, there'll be little bombs in it, numbers which are not quite right, and therefore you can trace it back to the person who'd leaked the numbers. So I have been sitting on this for a couple of months, and waiting to see whether journalists who are able to sort of do far more corroboration than I can, whether they might be able to find something. So this story was leaked to, or came out in both the Mail and the Times, and Sunderland have new owners, and the way that it works is that Sunderland Football Club is effectively owned by a company called Madrox. Madrox, it looks as if they've paid around about 38 million pounds to Ellis Short, the previous owner, but it would appear that a significant amount of that has come from the parachute payments, or was going effectively funded via Sunderland to Madrox to then pay Mr. Short. And this would have actually come from the parachute payments.
That off the top of my head, that's not right, is it?
Perfectly legal.
It is, right?
Yeah, perfectly legal, because ultimately, Madrox were buying the club from Mr. Short. Mr. Short said, I want 38 million pounds. Madrox say, we'll pay this to you, not all up front. So what happened was effectively Sunderland received the parachute payments. They appear to have lent the parachute payments to Madrox. And if these stories are true, because these are just draft accounts leaked, they could be inaccurate. It could be an elaborate ploy for all we know. But then the very strange thing was there's nothing to stop Sunderland lending money to Madrox, and that loan appears to have been written off. And so therefore you say, well, let's take a look at all the parties involved. Ellis Short, the former owner, it looks like he's going to get his 37 or 38 million pounds. Madrox will have paid that to Mr. Short. Will they have paid the loan back to Sunderland? That doesn't appear to be the case anymore. So it does appear that the sale proceeds were effectively the parachute payments were being diverted to allow Madrox to buy the club. And I think that's what's upset Sunderland fans. The local paper, the Echo, then did a Q&A with the club, and the answers to me were a bit muddled, and they some of the comments seemed to be very contradictory, and the only people I could see who were the beneficiaries of this would have been Madrox. So if we were looking to buy Sunderland Football Club, and they are up for sale. There's I think there's little denying that there has been contact with interested parties. You'd say, well, when I buy the club, what am I acquiring? I'm acquiring its assets, and you might have thought that one of the assets was in fact a £20 million loan, which was due to be received from Madrox, and now that's disappeared. Now, if you've spotted that as part of your due diligence, that's fine. You'd simply just go and reduce your price by 20 million. Sometimes people just buy things on a whim. We've all done. I appreciate I don't drink, but my mate Big Dave once had an angle grinder turn up at his house because he did 3 bottles of red the previous night and had bought something on eBay at 2 a.m. And people do buy football clubs on a similar basis to this. So therefore, you might have bought it expecting to get some of the money back, and now you're not. So I think that's upset Sunderland fans. And then on the Sunderland website, the club were clearly still irritated, and the club asked itself 5 questions, to which it gave one-word answers, which were yes, no, or something of that nature. So clearly, there's irritation. I've probably not helped the Sunderland owners here, but I've got no axe to grind against them on a personal level. I think that they are another one of these clubs. We were talking about this in terms of the PFA last week, who have used the Chancellor's benevolence to delay publishing their accounts for a further 3 months. And if you take a look at, therefore, Sunderland have put themselves in the same gang as Newcastle, as the PFA, both of who have got reasons perhaps to not want to show things. Derby and Sheffield Wednesday, who are both up on charges before the EFL. And as a Greek philosopher said, you judge a man by the company he keeps, and you wouldn't particularly want to be associated with that group of clubs when they're all suffering reputational damage at present.
Well, first of all, who hasn't ordered an angle grinder accidentally at 3 o'clock, apart from you, Kira? I mean, this country's awash with unneeded angle grinders, frankly. It just strikes me, though, I mean, that's a very clear explanation. It strikes me that, well, it should be illegal, frankly, because the club clearly seem to have lost money. But just in layman's terms, this is similar to me saying, right, I want to sell my house. I'll give you the money to buy my house. You don't have to pay me the money to buy my house, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
Right, okay, well, you can understand why if Sunderland fans also had part ownership in my house, they'd be cross about that going on. But I suspect this is something that will carry on for quite some time. Let's get to the questions that we couldn't do on Monday's pod, Kieran. They're good questions this time, and I hope you are fighting fit because you'll need your thinking cap on for a couple of them. The first question comes from Neil Condy. Hello, Neil. Neil refers back to, remember we had the conversation about Barcelona breaking with tradition, offering a short-term stadium sponsorship deal to raise money to fight COVID in Spain. Neil, question first of all is, how much do you think they will get? How much do you think they would reasonably get? And also, again, it's a good question. How much would it be worth to clubs in the Premier League, say, who currently don't have a stadium sponsor? And there aren't many of them, but if somebody wanted to sponsor the Football League's oldest football club, for example, and rename Selhurst Park, what sort of money would they be looking at?
I think stadium naming rights is one of these things where people start quoting very, very big numbers, but in reality, it tends to be a lot lower.
Oh, okay.
In the case of Barcelona, what they're going to be doing is that they are looking for a long-term sponsor. But for 2021, they say, well, we want effectively a charitable-based sponsor, and it would be called the Nike Camp Nou or the Megaphon Camp Nou. I think a lot will depend in terms of the price as to whether or not that stadium's going to be empty or full.
Yeah.
Because if I was sponsoring it and nobody was able to go and take their photographs near it, and you weren't able to see it full of 99,000 people, rampantly supporting their club and the excitement and the glamour and the atmosphere that goes with it, I think the value would be significantly lower. So I've done some digging round. Manchester City, as far as the Etihad, they had a bundle deal, so it was front of shirt sponsorship with the Etihad. But sort of the figures I've managed to pick up was around about £2 to £2.5 million a year. Arsenal, in terms of the of the Emirates, I think it's around about £2 to £3 million a year, and that's because I'm not quite sure there is a huge advantage to the sponsor itself. What happens if Arsenal have a poor season? Yeah, because then you'd have damage in terms of that, and also if we play a game of guess the club, the Sands venue. Okay, so what a club in the EFL is called the Sands venue. Any idea who?
No, I can tell you that Cheltenham are the Johnny Rocks. But which just made me laugh a lot, basically. You can't buy it. I'll have two together in the Johnny Rocks. But no, I don't know who the Sands.
Well, the Sands venue is Scunthorpe, and it's named after a Blackpool nightclub. We've got the Crown Oil Arena.
No, again.
No, that's Rochdale. The Pirelli.
Now the Pirelli is Burton.
Burton. And probably my favourite, the Tony Macaroni Arena.
Now I did know this. Which again, where's that? It's in the north, isn't it? Well, this is a good game. I like it, but
this is Livingston in Scotland.
Oh right, okay. Well, that is the north, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the north. Yes.
Sorry, Kate. I mean, it's strange. Isn't it? I feel slightly cross now because 12-year-old me would be furious at this because 12-year-old me, like 12-year-old you, knew the names of every single football stadium going down very low down the pyramid, plus their kits and their. So that's annoyed me that I don't know the ground names. But if you ask me again next year, there'll be different names. But I was one of those people who thought there was a lot of money in. I mean, particularly we talked about Everton, and it seemed to me that the naming rights was a big issue. This might seem like an odd question. Brentford's new stadium, for example, is on the flight path to Heathrow. So millions of people will fly across Brentford's new stadium every day. Would they be able to sell advertising on, if the stadium was named? It strikes me that that's a very good way of raising money. I mean, are things like that taken into account? Is like, if the stadium's next to a motorway, for example, would that add to the value?
Yes, because if you ever go down the M6, Walsall's stadium's on the is en route, and it does have big hoardings outside. So yes, these things. Can they get value? Can they get some money for it? Yes. Are we talking tens of millions of pounds? And I think this is what people are getting excited about. The answer is probably no. If you remember, we had this discussion a few weeks ago that the Premier League had stopped its own sponsorship because it felt that it could sell the Premier League as a brand rather than it being the Barclays Premier League. And similarly, when you talk about Anfield, if it became the Barclays Bank Anfield, that would mean that other financial services companies, perhaps overseas, wouldn't want to have any involvement with. So clubs tend to look at the whole picture, and the reason why I gave you, and I wasn't trying to trip you out with those names, is the fact that because you weren't familiar with them, can you see that the actual value is pretty insignificant?
Yeah, fair point. A question here from Kevin Hope, and Kevin's actually asking a question I think we all want to know the answer to first. Kevin says, I'm not sure how far back Kieran's spreadsheets go. I think some of them may be pre-decimal, though. But this is a really good question, actually, because there's been a lot of comparisons to this particular time. Can Kieran see what the 2008 financial crisis did to clubs' income, spending, wages, etc.? And was the Premier League even then pretty much immune to it? That's a very good question. There's a lot of us have been. That's the only comparison we have. It's the worst financial disaster since the bank crash of 2008. So, what was the effect back then?
Well, to answer his first question, my Premier League spreadsheet goes back to 1992 with the creation of the Premier League. In terms of individual clubs, for my club, it goes back to when we were formed. I've got all of the records. I've not got Palace's records going back to 1861. If Mr. Parish wants to dig those out, I'm willing to put them into Excel for him, though. But as far as the EFL are concerned, what I did, I thought I'd take a look at a couple of clubs that were around then and compare them to now. So I took a look at Ipswich, because Ipswich have been a hardy perennial of the Championship, and there was no noticeable impact to their income streams. They were, clubs in the Championship were actually hit far more by the demise of ITV Digital in 2002, 2003. As far as the Premier League was concerned, the Premier League's income went up in 2008, and I think this is testament to just how significant those TV deals are, that the Premier League that year had negotiated the start of a new 3-year deal with Sky, and they were reaping the rewards. So, I'm sorry, your cat's just walked across the screen, so I'll now get back to being a professional.
Smudge. Sorry, Smudge, thank you. It's all right, she wants to be with Daddy. That's fantastic. What can you say?
So the Premier League income went up. It went up in terms of match day. It went up in terms of commercial sponsorship, and it went up most of all in terms of the broadcasting. So as far as the EFL were concerned, there was no discernible decrease because whilst that was a tough year. I think it was very much focused upon particular industries, and it wasn't global in the sense of there's going to be no match day income for 2010, so for 2020, and potentially to the end of the 2020-21 season, and that will hit clubs to a far greater extent.
That's interesting. So I wasn't expecting that to be the answer. Funny enough, I was talking to somebody in the horse racing world just a couple of days ago. We're looking for glimmers of hope for football. And of course, horse racing was wiped out for quite some time by the foot and mouth disease. There was no horse racing for a long time. And that, within a year, had sort of fairly much bounced back. So there is hope that once this is over, football clubs, like the economy, will be resilient enough to spring back into place. Now, Mark Ridley has asked a good question. Hello, Mark. And Mark quite rightly points out that we talk a lot about TV broadcasting money on this podcast, but how much do radio broadcasters pay for it? BBC and TalkSport share Premier League coverage. Do they share it? Is it per game, per block? Who gets the first pick? And also, if you're a Walsall fan, you can listen to BBC West Midlands and so on and so forth. How much are local clubs getting out of local radio? That sounded very League of Gentlemen, didn't it? But you know what I'm saying.
Right. Well, as far as the Premier League are concerned, in a similar way to how they deal with TV rights, they actually break them down into packages. So there's 7 packages of domestic radio rights, of which the BBC have 4, which is, if ever you listen to 5 Live, you will see them boasting more Premier League matches than any other station, and TalkSport have the other 3. When it comes to the international rights, TalkSport now have all of the international rights for the Premier League, and they then effectively sell them on to individual countries and their partners. And in the EFL, TalkSport have the national rights, but BBC local stations have arrangements with local clubs in terms of local rights. Now, I did speak to somebody from one of the local radio stations this morning, and they said actually that the sum that they pay is effectively a pittance, and it has no significant impact. I've tried to dig out the overall prices paid. The last thing I found was around about 2005, and I think the BBC in those days were paying around about £4 million a season. The Premier League and the broadcasters themselves are very coy as to the actual value of the rights.
A question from Lucy Williams. Now, to be perfectly honest, the first time I read this question through, it was me that needed to lie down. Yes. To be perfectly honest,
I suspected as much.
It seems quite a technically complicated. It seems like quite a technically complicated question, but you will understand it. Now, Lucy's question is for a player swap deal. So, e.g., Alexis Sanchez for Henrik Mkhitaryan. What happens to the player book value for both clubs after the deal? So do they put the value of the player down as what it would have been for his last transfer? Or is the existing value wiped off and the new player registered at zero
it's neither, I think, in effect. It's the equivalent of trading in a car. So let's say that you're buying a car for 25 grand and the dealer gives you 10 grand for yours. Your cash cost is 15, but if somebody said, how much did that car cost, you'd say 25 grand. So as far as the swap between Mkhitaryan and Sanchez was concerned, the only issue here is that both clubs said, well, we think both player is worth 20 million quid. And therefore, they've both gone into the books at that particular price. I think the way it will have been done is that they will have both agreed a price so that there were no losses going through the accounts on part of the deal. So it's messy. It is accounting geekery, and it gives clubs an opportunity to make sure they don't lose out as far as the trade is concerned.
Okay, Lucy, I hope that answers the question. I did sort of drift off halfway through the answer. I'm not going to lie, but there you go. Jamie Moss has asked us a question. Thank you, Jamie. Hello. Again, Jamie said you've talked about in particular, possibly binning the Carabao Cup in future seasons due to European fixture congestion. Jamie's question is, why could it not be maintained as a source of income for the teams that are not playing in Europe, i.e. the rest of us, or would that be pointless without the glamour of the teams playing in Europe? And also, I'd like to add on, and I apologise to the person who tweeted me with this question. I for some reason, I couldn't find it, and I can't give your name, but it was a similar question. But what he said was, would it not be more sensible to bin the FA Cup? If you're going to lose any tournament, why not lose the FA Cup, which is very complicated because it starts in July and it's every club in the country, whereas the Carabao Cup is quite simply the clubs in the Football League, which struck me as a very good point.
Yep, so let's deal with those in turn. We could have a cup competition which doesn't involve the clubs in Europe. And if you go back to the glory days of the Zenith Data Systems Trophy,
of course, yes, which we won. Yeah.
That worked. It didn't tend to generate big crowds. I think the problem that would exist to an even greater extent than we have potentially at present is that the larger clubs wouldn't give it, and when by the larger clubs I mean the non-Big Six, the non-European competition participating clubs in the Premier League. They don't take the FA Cup seriously, where the winners get £4 million. They don't take the Carabao Cup seriously, where the winners get 100 grand. So would they take another competition seriously? And also, remember, we've also got the Checkatrade Trophy, where the lower league clubs effectively play against the under-23 teams of clubs from the Premier League. And the prize for that is 100 grand. So certainly from the perspective of the lower league clubs, I think it will be useful to have some form of cup competition, because if you talk to club owners, every night the club, every day the club is open for business is another chance to generate income. But I don't think it will be a big earner. In respect of the second question, have the Carabao Cup instead of the FA Cup. For next season, I think that makes a lot of logic, because there is no point in returning to the National League and the clubs below if they can't play before a paying audience, because they've got to pay the players. But equally, and there's a meeting taking place today, and today is Wednesday, for we're recording this for Thursday, it could be that by the end of today, that Leagues 1 and 2 will have been cancelled, because there is a meeting taking place, and certainly the noises that are coming out from a lot of clubs is the costs of hotels, the costs of physically putting on the matches, and also the costs of testing players in the lower leagues will exceed the money coming in. We're already living off fumes. We can't afford it. And then sort out the promotion and the relegation nonsense later. I don't give a damn. I want Accrington Stanley and Walsall and Grimsby versus Morecambe to be taking place at some point in the future, especially as we have been offered by a number of people to take us to Grimsby versus Morecambe. So that's the most important thing. Sort out relegation and promotion as a separate issue. Be grown-ups about it. But the existence and the survival of clubs surely should take priority.
Well, you're quite right, and I agree wholeheartedly. But you and I don't support a team that is currently third in League 1 or League 2. So your view on these things is coloured by your position in the league, basically, isn't it? As we've seen with clubs at the bottom of the Premier League. But you are absolutely right. But my guess is as well that when football does get back next season or the season after, League 1, League 2 clubs will fight tooth and nail against removing any sort of competition, FA Cup, Carabao Cup, because that will be some form of income at least, won't it?
Yes. I think in terms of the Carabao Cup, the changes to the Champions League are due to arrive in 2024-25. So by all means, it might be able to carry on. But if we've got an expanded Premier League next season, and that's another issue which is causing aggravation at present, because what the bottom clubs in the Premier League are saying, and I'm not taking a view on this, is that if we have to complete our fixture card and play 38 games and get relegated or not relegated on the basis of that, that's fine. But at the same time, there's the potential for Leeds and West Brom to be promoted having played 36 out of 46 games. So there's an inconsistency there. And I think there has to be communication and people to start to act like grown-ups. I'm often asked, why do people behave the way they do in terms of football club ownership? The vast majority of them are good. Why we can't just have a rule which is the same as the New Zealand All Black rule of no dickheads, and that would get rid of all of these problems, is beyond me.
Well, it's like the end of that famous classic Simpsons episode where Bart gets an elephant who misbehaves, and at the end, Marge asks, when he gets taken back to the safari park, Marge asks this long, complicated question about why some elephants misbehave, and the ranger's answer pretty much is that, because some elephants are dickheads, basically. Now, we've got two questions left. The first one is from John Cowley. Now, I don't know what John Cowley does, but if anybody sounds like an accountant, it's John Cowley, isn't it? That's a good, strong, honest name. You'd trust John Cowley, wouldn't you?
John Cowley and Co, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. John Cowley and family. Yeah. John's question, and it's a good, strong accounting question as well. Harking back to your comments on Filed a few weeks ago, and I'll refer you back to my previous comments about drifting off. I'm not a football finance expert. One of the reasons this pod works is because as each pod finishes, I forget everything you've told me. So next time we do a podcast, it all comes as fresh and new. So you might have to remind me what you said about Filed. But John's question is this: what is a taxman's view on allowing sponsorship by a company against tax when owning club is clearly more of a hobby than it is a viable commercial proposition. So, in other words, you've got a rich businessman, he wants to own his local club, they're not going to make any money. How can he claim money against the taxman in that situation?
Right. I'm not a tax man myself, but I did my research on this. Spoke to a friendly tax inspector of mine. You can only have sponsorship allowed. So we could pay £1 million to Filed as sponsorship, and that's fine. The club receives the money. That's not illegal. Does the sponsor get some tax benefits from that? It has to be if the sponsor's business is being promoted by Filed, if the purpose of the sponsorship is wholly and exclusively business related, and if the benefit of the sponsorship is wholly and exclusively business related. Now, if the sponsor can prove that to the taxman, they'll say okay. My experience of dealing with the tax authorities is that goes back to our previous conversation. Don't be a dickhead. Just don't try pushing it. And they've always been very reasonable. So you're a freelancer. You'll be able to claim certain expenses. Johnny Numbers will say, well, this is what we consider to be reasonable. And you say, well, could we claim a bit more? And Johnny will probably turn around and say, well, we could, but why do that? Why upset the taxman? Because then they might decide to investigate to a much greater degree. So it's a case of just being sensible, being fair, and then the sponsorship might work.
Yeah, we actually had my hairline has stopped receding about 10 years ago, a year after it started receding, which I was lucky in that extent. But I remember having a seriously conversation with my accountant, who is Bobby Numbers, as we know, not Johnny Numbers, but because he every year he just says, "Oh, we'll put another £1 on that. That's fine." I said, "We can't with the haircuts, surely." I'm, in all honesty, he said, "Kev, they're not going to come round and chat." I said, "I know, but I'm on TV occasionally." Yeah, but so yes, but you're right. Don't take the piss. That's always been his mantra. Don't take the piss, essentially. But which for an accountant doesn't look good on the poster in the window. But there you are. I've told him to change the poster, but it's basically don't take. Now, the last question is from Dave Baccarini. Now, if John Cowley sounds like an accountant, Dave Baccarini sounds like a local villain, basically. I'm sure he's a lovely bloke, but, if you went in the cafe and I see one of the Baccarini boys has been up, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that Dave Baccarini was one of them. And I read on, and I may be right, because Kieran, I've just listened to your latest podcast, and we have a bit in common. You said you're from the Elephant, right? So, yeah, I stand by my comments. Well, Dave was born and bred in the Borough. Now, for people from outside London I know we have listeners all over the world, the Borough isn't a London way of saying the hood. It is a place. There's a place called the Borough, which is just down the road from the Elephant. But then Dave goes on to say, Dave clearly escaped from his terrible criminal working class roots. Dave's a university lecturer in Australia. But his question is, Kieran, why are you not a Millwall fan like he is, because he supports his local team? Now, it's a very good question, but as we know, this opens a can of worms, because you can lay claim to supporting quite a few teams within the pyramid and outside, I believe. But yeah, I think it's worth repeating again for people who haven't listened to us from day one on this pod. Why aren't you a Millwall fan?
Well, I was born in the Elephant and Castle. I was born in a house which was my grandmother, who was a lavatory attendant at the Imperial War Museum in London. That's where I grew up. I could name every single battle because I knew the place inside out. And I lived with my Uncle Terry, who was a Millwall fan. So if I'd stayed there, I think I would have grown up to a Millwall fan. My Uncle Tone, who was a West Ham fan, who now supports Palace, because he actually lives around the corner from you. So, and my Uncle Tom, who had trials for both Millwall and Charlton. So it was a big football family. Black sheep of the family. My old man didn't like football. So I know. So we moved to Chelmsford because typical immigrant Irish family. There's an awful lot of you in a little bit of space. We moved to Chelmsford in 68, 69, and so I started supporting football. So I just always supported my local club. And I suspect if I'd stayed in the Elephant longer, my mum wouldn't let me go at the age of 6 to watch Millwall with my naughty Uncle Terry. So that's why I'm not a Millwall fan.
Well, that raises several things there. Kieran. First of all, I'm pleased to hear your gran was a lavatory attendant, but if we're going to start playing prolier than now, I can trump you on that. But that's if we're going to expose our working class credential, we'll do that for another pod. Secondly, I think you've fundamentally misunderstood the concept of supporting your local team. You support your first local. You don't support the team that is local to you. There'd be chaos if everyone just started supporting a team. You can go to them by all means, but you support your local team. Secondly, as a proud Londoner, it distresses me that a man from the Elephant now has lived so long outside London that he refers to it as Elephant and Castle. It's a castle, my man. It's not Elephant and Castle. It's your pearly king and queen antecedents would be clog dancing in their graves to hear you say things like that.
Well, that's fair comment, but I started supporting Brighton because when I was able to go effectively to football by myself, my old man, he was a fisherman. He wasn't a football fan, but going back to sort of one of the reasons why we do love the game, he was diagnosed with cancer in the 80s. He was dying, and the last thing we did together as dad and lad, he said, "Right, I want to go to a football match with you because it means so much to you." Oh. And we went to two matches. Peterborough away, FA Cup, 5th round, drew 2-2, 6th round against Southampton. So he's been to a home game and away game, and he said, "I want to live in your world just so you got something to memorise me by." And that's what football's about, Kevin. I think we're all united on that. And then he died shortly after. But I've got those memories of football with my old man in terms of supporting Brighton, and that means a lot.
As you know, normally, Kieran, I make it my life's ambition to follow everything you say with a little witty aphorism, but in the circumstances, I don't think that's appropriate, to be perfectly honest. But I echo everything you say in terms of the sentiment of football, and just the mere fact that Dave Baccarini is sitting at home in Australia as a Millwall fan, listening to us talk about football here, is one of the things that, again, fills me with joy about our beautiful game and reminds me so much why we miss it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being well again, Kieran. We're all very pleased that you're back. If you like the price of football, Guy has obviously missed me saying this, or he wants to please the sponsors, I don't know. If you like the price of football, why not subscribe to us in your podcast app and leave us a review or rating? I might say that again for the edit, more sincerely. If you like the price of football, why not subscribe to us in your podcast app and leave us a review or rating? And again, people have moaned about the way I pronounce Dap Dip, because there's been a thread on Twitter about what I'm actually saying. So the price of football is a Dap Dip production. If you have questions for us, then the address you want is questions@priceoffootball.com. We'll be back on Monday with more questions. Hope you have a safe weekend. Kieran, continue to get well soon. I'm really pleased to see you.
Okay, love to all. Look after yourselves, boys and girls.
The price of football. The price of football.